on the government of Bermuda's
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this Facebook Live session. I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us this evening. What we're going to attempt to do this evening is to provide some answers to questions that folks have asked over the course of the last couple of days with respect to the economy and the impact of COVID-19 on Bermuda's economy, and what strategies are we going to put in place to recover and take the country forward. Before we jump into the questions, I'd like first to thank all of our first responders who have been on the front lines of helping us deal with this pandemic. I'd also like to extend heartfelt condolences to all the families who have suffered losses as a result of COVID-19. You continue to be in our thoughts and our prayers, and we will looking forward to working with you over the course of the coming days and months as you grieve your loss. This is my first time on this kind of forum, and I'm looking forward to fielding a wide range of questions around your concerns about the economy and how we're going to tackle it as a government, as a community, to reposition Bermuda to come out of this better than we were before this all started. I would say, though, that we are in a new world, and what we perceived as normal before is probably not the normal going forward. And we're going to need to be flexible, work together as a community to promote Bermuda and to get the best out of all of us as we continue to thrive as a jurisdiction.
Okay. Minister, how has Bermuda's economy been impacted by COVID-19?
The impact of COVID-19 on Bermuda's economy has been profound. If we think back to the 2 to 3 week period before the shelter-in-place order, we had slowed down the level of economic activity in the country by asking people to work remotely. Stores were providing services curbside. So the regular practice of being able to go into a store to make a purchase was curtailed. Our hotel properties, which were at the beginning of the hotel season because of airline travel and because of concerns around COVID-19, saw a dramatic fall off in volumes and occupancy. And so the impact from the hotels, the airlines, has had a profoundly negative impact on retail and restaurants, small and medium-sized businesses. And then with the shelter-in-place orders that happened over the course of 4 weeks, our economy ostensibly put the brakes on it, and it ground not to a stop, but to a very, very slow crawl. All said, I think the impact has been significantly negative. However, I'm hopeful that as we start to turn the corner, and starting this morning, opening the economy back up, that we can kind of get back on our feet. The government will try to assist in as many ways as we possibly can. But I accept that the best outcome for us will be us all working together as stakeholders in the future of Bermuda.
Thank you. Most restaurants right now are under extreme pressure. You spoke about businesses, and they are currently suggesting that they pay a portion of their rent as well as fees and health insurance. Will there be any land tax or any tax relief offered to the hospitality businesses, such as restaurants, etc.?
We've been having ongoing conversations with a variety of stakeholders, restaurants, hotels, retailers, just to name a few, around potential relief that we can provide as a government. Ideas under active consideration are payroll tax concessions, land tax relief. The government is not responsible for the cost of health insurance, and so we are encouraging insurers, whether they be for health or homeowners insurance, to be pragmatic in their pricing as a result of the economic crisis. I would also say that those who are positioned to be able to pay should pay, and those who have the need for relief should be considered for relief by service providers. I want to balance the conversation about concessions with this point. The government needs to fund its operations, and inasmuch as it is not collecting tax revenue, it runs the risk of incurring larger deficits and needing to borrow more money. And the tax receipts are the source of funding the government, but also the source of repaying its debt. And so we have to be very thoughtful about the relief, and we're looking for ideas from everybody. I have a bunch of ideas, and I'm working with folks in industry around some ideas around how we can provide relief to people, support to people, and help folks through this difficult time.
The government's two major financial responses to COVID-19 of affected businesses has been the introduction of unemployment benefit scheme and $12 million given to the BEDC to support businesses. Yes, this will go a long way to help a lot of companies make ends meet, but not all. How does this government intend to support medium to large size businesses who have 50 plus employees and over 5 million in revenues?
Well, we will look at payroll tax relief. We will look at land tax. We will look at potentially some sorts of subsidies around loan guarantees. There are a number of things that we can look at as a government. We don't have all the ideas ourselves, in as much as there are ideas that businesses can provide to us. We think we would consider them for their efficacy and their cost, and work with businesses as best as we can. I would suggest, though, that the money that has been given to the BEDC, although their mandate, there is a view that it's only for small business, the mandate of the BEDC is for small and medium-sized businesses. And so I would encourage entrepreneurs, business owners to have a dialogue with the BEDC to see if there is an opportunity where they can help. The unemployment benefit program extends to all employers, and we have sought to provide some relief and tried to be pragmatic in the application of that program. I would say that initially it was, in its design, it was a program intended where the employee would have to do take all the steps in order to get the benefit. As time has gone on, and as we've tried to find a way of delivering benefits to people in a quicker fashion, we have changed the regulations to allow the employer, who typically has all the information around the employee, to assist us in getting benefits paid a whole lot quicker.
What can the everyday resident do to assist?
I think the first thing from a health perspective is to practice social distancing as per the guidance from the Premier and the Minister of Health and Ministry of Health. I think good hygiene in terms of hand washing, etc., is really important. I think following the rules is really critical at this time, because we have to be careful with this virus, which is extraordinarily contagious. I think people also should look out for their neighbors and for the vulnerable members of the community. I think that's really important. One of the things that Bermuda is known for, especially during hurricane season, is what I call an esprit de corps, a sense of teamwork, a sense of community. And I think this pandemic calls upon us again to behave like a community and work together as we work our way through it.
Are you anticipating that members of Parliament are going to take a pay cut and/or furlough days for civil servants?
We will be engaging the unions who represent public officers, both the BIU and the BPSU, in the coming days. My expectation is that in light of the curtailed or severe reduction in our revenue, that we're going to require some sort of concessions from public officers. And inasmuch as public officers have, for the benefit of, for the duration of the crisis thus far, not seen any diminution or cutbacks in their salaries, whereas a broad swath of the community has, it is not unreasonable, in my view, for us to ask for them to contribute something as well. My expectation for members of Parliament, members of the Senate, ministers, they will follow suit with what the public officers do and make a contribution as well.
Are there plans for a longer unemployment fund to be given? And what are the estimates on the jobs impacted?
Well, the program that's currently in place was something that we pulled together in fairly short order. I think it was done in less than a week. We've been administering it over the course of the last 6 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks. We've learned a number of lessons. The initial objective for the unemployment benefit is a 12-week program. I think the thinking behind the 12-week program was because after 12 weeks of unemployment, persons can apply for financial assistance. And so that is the current thinking. My sense, so in terms of cost, over the course of the last 6-7 weeks, there have been 3 payment cycles. We have made about $15 million in payments in the form of 16,000 payments. And so I can't give you an exact number because the number moves around a bit. And some people in the first wave of payments have received 3 payments through yesterday, and others have received 1. And so all told, I think it's in the 8,000 to 9,000 persons who have been unemployed at this point affected and paid. We understand that there's still a number of folks who are still in the queue to get money, and we're working very hard to get those persons processed. I will tell you that in making payments, getting payments to people relatively quickly, a couple of observations. One, the government infrastructure was not built for a quick turnaround. 2, as a result of that, I had to break a whole host of rules in order to get payments done for people. We are now working to kind of fix the things that I broke. I will tell you that some of the folks who work on my team were initially very resistant to the outside the box thinking. But I do believe that at the end of the day, rather than me worrying about the political heat that I will take for breaking the rules, it was more important to me to ensure that people who were vulnerable, who were out of work and didn't have money to sustain themselves, got their payments so that they could at least provide for their families. And I'll make that decision any day of the week if I have to do it all over again.
Is there expected to be a new government budget for 2021 released, given the previous presentation is now out of date?
We are going to do a recasting of the budget for no other reason than to ensure that the general public, the Bermuda population, understands where government's priorities are and how we plan to spend the money. Also, it's important that we show people what the revenue is going to look like, because I think governments tend to spend their money on the things that are their priorities. And we need to kind of show folks what the revenue numbers are going to look like and how we're planning on spending those dollars over the course of the next 11 months. It will be a difficult exercise, I tell you, because I would say that our budgets are our best thinking at any point in time. And we are still trying to assess the full impact of the COVID-19 on our economy.
It was mentioned previously that the GDP outlook for 2020 was 7.5 to 12.5% contraction, but other models were being developed. Is there an update on when this will be finalized and what impacts are due to be expected?
Trying to determine what the impact was going to be is a difficult exercise under the best of circumstances. The 7.5 to 12.5% estimate that I gave a few weeks ago was primarily based on a view that was espoused or shared by there was a 3% contraction on global economy put forth by one global authority. That number has actually changed. The number of the 3% contraction was thought to be conservative. I think we have a couple of things going for us. Undoubtedly, our tourism industry has been impacted, and we are still trying to kind of understand the full impact of that. Fortunately for Bermuda, we actually have another leg to our economy that is still to some degree thriving, the international business industry. So I suspect that 12 to 15% as a first guess was probably as reasonable as we could have made at that time. It would not surprise me if the number is slightly larger than that. It wouldn't surprise me if the number is slightly larger than that.
Okay. Minister, is there any thought of allowing access to private pensions as Cayman is doing?
Thanks for that question. The short answer is yes. I will be presenting in Cabinet on Tuesday a Cabinet memorandum on making some further changes to our private pensions. The idea on the table, there are actually two of them. The first one is to allow for a hardship withdrawal relating to COVID-19 of $10,000. The second is to allow persons to withdraw through a loan to themselves up to 25% of their pension balance that they can use either to buy a home or to invest in a business. Now, pensions are set up so that people can save for their retirements. And so I tend to be somewhat hold the underlying reason for a pension to be somewhat sacrosanct or dear to my heart, because we want people to be positioned in their later years to be able to sustain themselves. And so the idea behind the 25% withdrawal to buy a home or to start a business through a loan is you're basically borrowing from yourself. And we're still working on defined details and the term of that loan. But what would happen is you would pay yourself back, let's say around 2 to 2.5% interest on a loan that you've made to yourself. That way, you are continuing to save for your retirement. And while the money isn't invested in the market, you are generating a return that you are paying to yourself. And so my thinking is that the loans can be for 10 to 15 years. We're still working on the finer details, but the idea is to provide people with an opportunity to get a one-time $10,000 relief from their pensions, and then another opportunity to potentially use their pension assets to invest. I would say this, I want people to be very careful about drawing the comparison between Bermuda and what Cayman has done. Bermuda's pension scheme, private pension scheme, has a series of options in it that allow for hardship withdrawals. One of them which do not currently exist inside of the Cayman pension regime. And so I want to be sure that people understand that when they're comparing what we're doing to what they're doing, we are actually enhancing an already, I think, liberal pension regulation to allow people to withdraw additional funds because of hardship.
Is there any consideration to offering early retirement? The police, prisons, and fire service can potentially retire at 55. There would potentially be a cost saving in extending that or lowering to the rest of the public service.
When I appeared with the Premier, I guess a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, at a press conference at the Barclay Institute, I was asked a question about options for the way forward. My answer then is the same as my answer today. We are considering all options.
As you move to paperless and a digital government, is there a way to have vetting of the payment of payroll tax, social insurance, and outstanding payments to the accountant general searchable digitally instead of manually?
So the reason why I smile is because the questions seem to be confusing, but the question for me is not particularly confusing. I will tell you this, that if we had a digital ID, an EID for people as we were working to process unemployment benefits, the process would have been a whole lot easier. And I think I'll say this, that the government today has a lot of paper and manual processes, and we have a ways to go with respect to kind of modernizing how we affect transactions and deal with people. I think this crisis has highlighted the deficiency in our processes, and we are better informed now than ever before. And I would not be surprised if there's a rapid movement towards paperless and digital.
Understandably, the current focus is on health as it relates to COVID-19 and saving lives and social distancing. Do you think it's important to have a parallel conversation about the economy and what the future may look like for Bermudians ahead financially?
I do, but I think the strategy has been saving lives has been the priority, and the second priority has been saving livelihoods. Now that we have, I think, to some degree, gained some control over the spread of this virus in Bermuda, we're now pivoting to the economy. And I would suspect that over the course of the coming days, weeks, and months, there will be a lot of focus on how we take Bermuda forward. So I think the sequencing of the conversation is appropriate. Our first priority should have been focusing on saving lives. And now that we have gotten through the 4 weeks of shelter in place, it does make sense to start focusing on the economy. I will tell you, though, that the focus on the economy has been ongoing. It's just that the priority has been primarily on health.
Can you estimate at this point how big a hit government will take due to the lack of tax income over the past shelter-in-place weeks?
I can't estimate over the last 4 weeks. I can tell you that the preliminary estimates that I'm getting from my team show a reduction in tax revenues in the order of $150 to $200 million.
It seems clear that the lowest earners, who are typically those with the weakest savings, will be hit hardest by this pandemic. Can you offer any reassurance that the lowest earners will get adequate government help?
I think part of the focus on getting the unemployment benefit out to people as soon as possible was largely based on trying to ensure that our most vulnerable had the means to provide for themselves. That was our priority then, and it will be our priority going forward. We certainly understand that there are folks out there who earn small amounts of money, but who have awesome responsibilities of caring for their families. And as a modern society, we have an obligation to ensure that people are taken care of. And government is usually the first line of defense for those folks.
Is the government currently reducing or scrapping rents for its tenants and concessionaries?
That is so our general guidance has been for landlords and tenants to engage in conversations around obligations. We have tried to be very careful on this point because there are contracts in place. Having said that, there are people who are having difficult times, and it is important that folks recognize difficulty that is being had by either the landlords and the tenants. And so we've asked people to be thoughtful about this and to work on reaching accommodation. My suspicion is that the Bermuda Housing Corporation, who probably is the largest landlord with a link to government as a quango, would need to engage their tenants around how they can provide support in as much as people will have difficulty in paying rents.
Has any thought been given to increasing the tax on money being sent out of the country through foreign workers?
No thought has been given to that.
Have you considered at all waiving all land taxes?
We have not considered waiving all land taxes. I would say that in the budget that we presented in February the 21st, we had projected a deficit of approximately $20 million. And that deficit was going to be used to fund capital expenditures. Had we decided to forego the capital expenditures, we would have had a balanced budget. Inasmuch as there is a further reduction in tax revenues, there will be increased pressure on the deficit for the government. And so we have to be strategic and targeted in the forms of tax relief that we give. Because at the end of the day, I still need to raise enough funding to provide for the government.
Is devaluing our dollar a likely scenario? And if so, what does this mean for Bermuda?
A devaluation of the currency is not an idea under active consideration.
What do you say to those who have still not received their unemployment benefits? You did say you would try to make payments, but what do you say to those who are struggling to make ends meet and have not received any unemployment benefits?
I have been fielding lots of emails and calls from folks who know people who have not received their unemployment benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, we have made 16,000 payments. And we're incredibly proud of having done that work, but that is of no consolation to those who have not received money. My sense is that the reasons why folks have not received money is probably because of an inaccuracy inside of their application. So we've had instances where we've had incorrect bank account numbers, incorrect salary numbers, incorrect email addresses for their employers. And so I would encourage people to reach out to the Department of Workforce Development. I think the minister on Monday evening at the press conference mentioned that if folks have not received the payment, that they should be reaching out to Department of Workforce Development. I wouldn't suggest that people go and visit them. The last thing that I think they need is kind of a crowd of people outside of their building. But I think there are a couple of telephone numbers that were offered up. We can provide them on Facebook. But I would just ask you to please be a little bit more patient with us as we work through the process. This has been an incredibly difficult exercise to kind of turn around on a fairly short time frame. I think we've done some great work. We have unfortunately missed some people. We're trying to remedy those situations as we speak.
There are many people who do not qualify for unemployment benefit because they have not been paying their payroll tax. Now that this has been thoroughly highlighted, how do you intend to ensure that people pay in the future?
Well, as I said before, we've changed the regulations about 3 or 4 times. In the first instance, we changed them to allow employers to provide information. In the second instance, we changed them to allow unemployed persons who had not paid their payroll taxes to get a benefit. In the third instance, we changed it to allow self-employed persons to also get the benefit. When we made those changes, there was a requirement that people who had not heretofore paid their taxes get a tax ID number, so that they are now registered with the Office of the Tax Commissioner. I would say this: the reason why we pay taxes is to fund the government so the government can do its work. Part of our job is to help people who are vulnerable and who need assistance. The unemployment benefit is a very good example of how a government can provide assistance. But that assistance is paid for by all the people who pay taxes. And so it is a bit unfair that people who have not been contributing are participating. But I would say that we have a higher calling, a moral calling, to ensure that people do not go hungry. And so instead of us spending a lot of time focusing on what people haven't done in the past, my plea to people is that you have to pay your fair share, because you never know when you're going to need the assistance of government to help you during a hard time.
Was part of the reason to end shelter in place to get businesses to open to make money? Was this part of the intent to increase consumer spending?
A part of ending shelter in place was because of the advice from the health professionals that we had been through 2 cycles of the virus potentially running its course. And then there was a judgment made from a health perspective as to whether or not we could mitigate the risk of any further spread. It would be disingenuous for me to say that economic considerations were not among those things that were thought about as we were coming to evaluate the decision around ending shelter in place. The shelter in place, the 4 weeks shelter in place, have had a profoundly negative impact on the pace of economic activity in the country. And we run the risk of having further deficits and more people out of work if we don't get the economy moving again. And I think the balance that we're trying to strike is one wherein we acknowledge the danger of COVID-19, but also putting in place strategies to mitigate those risks. So the continuation of social distancing, the curbside services that are being offered by certain retailers. So in a way, we're getting business going again, but we're trying to be mindful of the assemblage of large amounts of people while we're still in a very tender time with COVID-19.
Thank you. Many exempt companies based in Bermuda over the years have stated publicly that they have profited hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Will the Bermuda government increase a tax on these companies that have obviously gained a huge amount of revenues while primarily operating in Bermuda?
The companies that you're talking about are subject to a tax treaty that Bermuda put into place many, many years ago. And that's a deal that the government of the day and successive governments have continued to honor. And so that's the law. I would say that the international business sector contributes a significant amount of tax revenues to the government, I think on the order of about 30+%. So the suggestion that they are not contributing enough, I think we would need to kind of re-examine that view. I would also say that part of the reason why companies are based here is a range of factors. I don't think the tax is a primary driver for many international companies that are currently based here. It may have been some time ago. I think they're largely here based on our legal system, the quality of the intellectual resources here, the quality of our accountants and lawyers and other service providers, our proximity to the US and the UK, the whole range of reasons. But I don't think that the solution to our problems is to tax more. In fact, I think the solution to our problem is to encourage more companies to come here so that we can expand the base of potential taxpayers.
Thank you. Have you had any talks with the chambers of commerce regarding how many businesses will not survive?
We have talked about the difficult economic environment and the fact that there are companies going into this crisis that were vulnerable, that may not be able to withstand the crisis. They haven't been able to quantify the number of companies, but I think the concept is one that I am sensitive to. But I do accept that in any normal economic cycle, there are companies that start and there are companies that end. And it's a function of kind of any normal economy.
Do you anticipate having to borrow more money to keep the Bermuda's economy afloat?
Yes, I do anticipate having to borrow more money. For the simple reason, I was going to have to borrow more money anyway to start with, because we had forecasted a $20 million budget. We have borrowed $150 million. We actually have a credit line. We haven't borrowed the money yet. We haven't drawn down on the line yet. I'm signing the credit papers next week. But those funds will be used to provide for the unemployment benefit program and to fund deficits. We will look at potentially borrowing more money as a way to promote stimulus in the economy. The exact amount of that money, I have not decided yet. I am sensitive to the existing debt burden the country currently has, and I have to be mindful that any money that I borrow has to be paid back. And so those factors are the things that I'm actively giving consideration to as we work on bringing the economy back.
Thank you. Minister, what would you like to see happen to get the island back on track?
Well, I'd like people to, one, be safe, because I think if we can contain the disease, then we don't have to resort to future shelters in place, which have the effect of dampening the economy. I'd like folks to give strong consideration to buying Bermuda. When you purchase Bermuda, you are also ensuring that your fellow Bermudians are employed. I would encourage folks to be thoughtful about how they spend their money, but also be safe and to save a little bit.
Has there been any progress with your economic development team?
We are almost there. It has been a challenging exercise for a couple of reasons. One, I have spent probably much more time than I probably should have on getting the unemployment benefit working for the folks who have been paid. Two, I am spoiled for choice with a number of folks who have indicated a willingness to want to serve. The challenge is that I believe that big committees are can inherently be ineffective. And so I'm finalizing my thinking around the right sizing of the Economic Advisory Committee and what the framework is going to be for other subgroups of subcommittees who can go off and do additional work. I would encourage people just to be a little bit patient. I'm almost there, and I will be making an announcement in the coming days.
Tell us why the banks haven't lowered their interest rates yet. Butterfield lowered rates in Cayman 1% more than they have in Bermuda. How is that fair? And what is the government going to do about it?
I have tried, I've had a number of conversations with Bermuda Bankers Association around interest rates. It is not lost on me that there has been a difference in the amount of rate cut that has happened in Bermuda versus one bank that has business in both jurisdictions. I have raised the concern with the institution. They have advised that there are different credit risk profiles of their loan books in Bermuda and in Cayman. We are looking at some ways of trying to bring some harmonization to our rate structures. There is a different Bermuda dollar base rate that exists at all three banks. And my own sense is that if we can find a way to encourage the banks to use the same base rate, that may help to make pricing a bit more transparent. But we continue our dialogue with the banks because at the end of the day, the banks are going to need customers who can honor their obligations. And the way banking works, having been a banker for the better part of almost 25 years, banking doesn't work unless there are depositors that deposit their money in the bank, and that there are persons who borrow from the bank. And so as we think about the recovery, the banks are going to be an important partner in helping the economy to move forward. And I think banks need to be thoughtful about their role that they play in any economy as they think about the pricing of their products.
Minister, don't you think that cost cutting throughout the public sector would be a very good start?
I think it is always important and always helpful to review how we do things with the view towards understanding or making improvements in how we do things. So one of the, I always often point to change, and I cite the example of the abacus, that little device where you move the balls across the left to right as you add two numbers together. The abacus, as ancient as it is, still works. We now have electronic abacuses. They're called smartphones, where you can kind of do all the calculations on a calculator inside your smartphone. That is an instance where innovation has actually resulted in a more accurate and a more timely ability to get an answer. Are there things inside the public service that we can be doing better, differently? Yes. Yesterday, I spent about an hour on the phone speaking with the team at the Registrar of Companies, who have, for the most part, been working remotely for the last 6 weeks. They have been highly engaged with their customers and have been providing their service. And before anyone sends me a note telling me that, well, they didn't answer their query, they're not perfect. But I, based on my conversation with them yesterday, have been fairly impressed with their ability to adapt to the times in which we're operating and still focus on delivering high quality service to those users. Now, the ROC is largely a paper-based organization. Later this year, they'll have a new system in place where a lot of their paper files will be electronic. And so the organization is moving with the times into creating a more efficient and effective model that can be more responsive to their customers. Are there other parts of government that can be forward-looking like that? Absolutely. As I said before, I think there are instances when the current construct of government has been challenged operating under normal circumstances. Then you throw in a crisis, and then everything just kind of goes a bit wacky. And so I think that there is a great opportunity coming out of COVID-19 for us to kind of really assess how we do things and to develop strategies on how we can change the practices that we currently engage in to make the delivery of services to people more effective and more efficient. At the end of the day, the public officers who work in government work for the taxpayers. And I think that there needs to be a level of customer service that exists in terms of the delivery of service that actually makes for a better experience for the customer. And I'm not expecting that that comment is going to be interpreted the way in which it was intended. But my job as the Minister of Finance is to be an effective servant for the people of Bermuda, all of them, whether the people voted for me or not. And I take that very seriously. And so my expectation is that public officers similarly take their roles seriously in terms of providing the service to the taxpayers who actually fund their salaries.
Minister, are you also in talks with the opposition on your plan for the economy going forward?
So yesterday, during the Premier's press conference, I think he had a special guest. And I think in my reading of the transcript, because I didn't see the a press conference live, it was mentioned that this was the first time ever in which a premier had shared the stage with his opposite. And so I think over the course, especially over the course of the last 6 weeks, we have tried to work really closely together because this isn't a PLP government problem or an OBA opposition problem. This is a Bermuda problem. And I think all of us want to see the best for this island coming out of this crisis. I have said publicly, and I can recall in the lead up to the conversation of my ministerial statement around 150 increase in the debt ceiling, I had reached out to the new shadow minister of finance, Patricia Gordon Pamplin. I reached out to her on the unemployment benefit, and I will be reaching out to her and MP Cannonier with respect to participating in the Economic Advisory Council.
You spoke earlier about lessons learned for your ministry post experiencing COVID-19. Can you discuss some of those lessons that you've learned?
Sure. So I had, I'm Bermuda's 10th Minister of Finance, and I think that my ministry, at least the headquarters, has probably been structured the way it has been for the better part of 3+ decades. I had always made the observation that the organization needs to be more nimble. The threats that we faced 2-3 decades ago are very different from the threats that we face today. And so the organization needs to be recalibrated, reorganized in order to kind of meet the needs of contemporary governance. I think, broadly speaking, people generally are resistant to change because they like the known, and change can be disruptive and upsetting. But change is necessary. If you think about it, 4 or 5 decades ago, we were a place where we provided services to captive insurance companies. Through the passage of time and the qualifications and learning of our people, we are now one of the world's risk capital for insurance. We've evolved, and I think organizations, including the government, needs to evolve with the times. Are there things that we can be doing better? Absolutely. Are there ways that we can deliver services to people better? Yes. I think part of my challenge as the Minister of Finance, and I kind of make this as a bit of a joke, is that the way governments tend to work is you have one party in power and they have their programs, and then the government changes and then the new party comes in, don't like the old government's programs, and then they kind of add their own on top. But there's never any real assessment to go back and kind of test the efficacy of what the government is doing, because that's a way for us to kind of better utilize and better target the use of our dollars. I think because of the challenges presented by COVID-19, we are going to be forced to assess how we spend every dollar to ensure that we are spending it most effectively to meet the needs of the people of Bermuda.
And so in meeting those needs, how are you motivating job creators to stay on the island?
Well, so I think we need to look at the things that Bermuda does well, right? So we're a stable political environment. We have a very, very old and trusted and reliable court system. We have political stability. We have a very highly qualified workforce with people who have skill sets that are high in demand and experts. I think from a fiscal perspective, I am more than willing to use the tax code as a way of encouraging people to bring jobs here. We've done it before. We did it with economic substance, where we provided payroll tax relief to employers who are starting new jobs. And I foresee that we'll continue to do those things. We'll provide incentives for people to bring jobs here, because all told, this is a good place to work and a good place to live.
Thank you. Minister, would you be looking to embrace a new risk management board team to assist with this pandemic?
I think that a risk management team is probably appropriate for the running of government absent the pandemic. I think the pandemic is just the latest threat that has reared its head. But as a jurisdiction, we face threats all the time. And I think it would be, and the Minister of National Security has a team, disaster relief team, I think it's called the Durham team, whose job it is, I think, to kind of plot out these kinds of crises and how the government responds to them. Are there opportunities where they may go back after this to kind of say, here are things that we could have done differently or things that we could have done better? I'm sure that exercise will happen, but it should not be a surprise to people that governments are doing scenario playing and doing some work around anticipating future threats and how you're going to deal with them. Thank
you. Will you be undertaking an updated actuarial report on the contribution to the pension funds, given these unprecedented impacts on Bermuda's workforce?
The actuarial review on the Social Insurance Fund and the Public Service Superannuation Fund has actually been ongoing for the last couple of months. So my expectation is that the actuaries may need to sharpen their pencils again to have a look at what the impact has been as a result of the decline in the equity markets as a result of this pandemic. But the markets have started to come back, and so we'll see what their analysis yields.
What do you predict as the worst case scenario for our economy going forward?
Not trying to be cute, but I'm not in the prediction business, and I wouldn't hazard a guess. I would say this, that we understand that the slowing down of the economy in order to preserve lives would have a negative impact on the economy. Now that we have lifted the shelter in place, we are working now to get the economy moving again, and we are prepared to engage all stakeholders in helping us devise strategies to have Bermuda thrive again.
And if we should have to go back into our shelter-in-place provision, and phase one, we see increased numbers in positive COVID-19 tests, what will that impact? How will that impact our economy?
Similar to the impact that it's had over the course of the last 6 weeks, it will be the equivalent of putting the brakes on the economy to slow it down more. And I think we would have unemployment continuing. I think you would have more businesses at risk. It would be not ideal.
And do you foresee that we'll be in phase one for long?
I think so. The guidance that the Premier has offered is that, and the reason why there are no dates behind each of the 4 phases is because we need to see what the experience yields. And I think I fully embrace that approach. We have to see how well we do as a country in containing this disease before we can move to the next phases. And I can appreciate the folks want things to get back to normal, but we also have an obligation to ensure that we protect the lives of people.
Do you anticipate that our economy will shrink?
There will be some temporary shrinkage, I believe. We have stopped to some degree a huge portion of our economy. I think our hotel sector will suffer. I think we are now at the beginning of the tourism season. We don't have the benefit of airlift into the island. I think there are other jurisdictions that are still trying to contain the spread of the virus. Most of our tourism focus has been on the East Coast of the United States, which if you look at the news, you can see that they're still suffering from the spread of the disease. So I think we will see a negative impact in the hotel space, but it gives us a chance to figure out if we can change the model, quite candidly.
Are there any models currently that you are looking to replicate here in Bermuda as it relates to the economy and getting Bermuda back on track?
Well, we had, in my budget statement, we talked about expanding our financial services industry to embrace high net worth families, private family office space. I believe that there is, Bermuda had for a long time had a thriving funds business. A lot of that in the hedge fund space has now gone to Cayman. I think that there is an opportunity for us to re-enter the fund space, maybe not hedge funds, but different investment vehicles. And we're looking at strategies around how do we encourage those types of entities to domicile in Bermuda. And we're looking at expanding in the insurance space. There's some things in the hopper that we're looking at as a way to kind of even develop a third pillar to the economy. One thing that I think we have always been aware of, but now get to see the really significant impact of, is when there is a negative impact on one pillar of our economy, just how that impact travels throughout the entire economy.
We have a large amount of foreign workers in the hotel industry. How does repatriation impact our economy and potential training opportunities?
Well, I think in as much as there will not be full operations of hotels, those employers are going to need to make the decisions that they need to make around repatriating some of their foreign or guest workers. The challenge that I would have is that this presents an opportunity for Bermudians who want to work in those fields. And so if you're of interest, then you need to be sure that you're ready to rise to the challenge.
Has the government considered to sell any of its government properties not being used or derelict government buildings?
I would say that not specifically, but in keeping with my broad answer around all options are under consideration, we'll have to consider everything.
Thank you. Minister, we're now at 8:32, and we have promised our listening audience that we will be for about an hour. Do you have any closing comments?
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone who has tuned in this evening for this broadcast. I'd like to encourage everyone to stay safe, to follow the rules. I know that it has been a very stressful 4 weeks of being sheltered in place and wanting to get out and see friends and family and kind of carry on your normal routine as it existed before the shelter-in-place order took place. But I would caution you to please follow the rules. Your government is working its best to try to ensure that we contain this disease and we preserve as many lives as possible. I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation during the course of the shelter-in-place. In as much as you and your employer have worked on arrangements where you can work remotely, I would encourage you to keep doing that as we work our way through this pandemic. Thanks.